So, what is a spiritual awakening? I'll try to explain this to you. A spiritual awakening is the moment in which the consciousness which created everything starts returning to itself or recognizing itself through the perspective of an individual human being. So, to understand this, we require some background. Teal Swan and various other very old scriptures say that the universe is like an ocean and human beings are like waves within it. So we have somewhat of a separate existence depending on the kind of lens you choose to look at the ocean, but in essence we're not separate from the ocean at all. And we have the ability to experience ourselves as the ocean as well. We're like waves on the ocean, going in a specific direction, having the impression that we exist, until at some point the wave might realize that in fact he's just as much the ocean as any other part of the ocean, and there is no clear boundary to himself to separate himself from the ocean. This moment of realizing that maybe I'm not actually separate from whatever surrounds me and from this whole cosmos is just the very beginning of a whole journey, which essentially is leading to the point in which you fully experience yourself as the ocean as a whole. It seems like through certain people, both the unity consciousness, which is aware of itself as a whole, and the separate consciousness, which is aware of itself as a wave in the ocean, can exist at once. So the spiritual awakening is the point in which the wave starts realizing that it is the ocean, or in other words, the ocean through the wave starts looking at itself. We tend to seek answers to our questions and solutions to our problems on the outside, whereas as soon as you realize that you might be the whole cosmos, then there is not that much of a point anymore in running around and seeking answers outside of yourself or seeking solutions to your problems outside of yourself, as you are everything and everything is in you. There is a certain paradox about consciousness trying to understand itself. And for me, this was one of the first clarities that I found on my path of awakening, which made me turn inward. And it is that consciousness can try to understand everything outside of itself, but it can never try to understand itself. So the thing that consciousness is cannot really be found in a truthful form outside of itself. The thing which is looking at itself can only try to see if it's possible to understand itself through itself. In science, the importance of trying to find an objective point of view is very much stressed. And if you really think about this, you realize that it is impossible to do science about consciousness. Or to some extent, it is impossible because consciousness is the thing which is perceiving of everything. So if there is a distortion by looking through that lens, it will never get the full truth of what it is by looking at something externally. The only way to figure out what it is for consciousness is to turn into itself and to start investigating itself by itself. And that is kind of the game that this whole universe is playing. Everything in this universe is embedded with consciousness, and the human being has the ability to realize this for itself, that it is embedded with consciousness and can therefore also explore this consciousness within itself instead of looking and hearing and speaking and listening and tasting and whatever you can do with all of your senses. So this turn inward has a lot of effects upon how a human being is and operates. Because once you start observing yourself and everything that is within the sphere of your consciousness with closed eyes and just by sitting still, a whole other universe indeed opens within you, and you start also learning the controls of it. So you have a physical body, you have a mind, and you have an energetic system. The more you observe it and the more you become aware of it, the more you can also learn about the workings of it. And this gives you the ability to make choices about how to handle this system. And this might also be a way that certain people fall into a spiritual awakening. If they're really badly suffering and at some point in their lives they have a crash, they have to try and build themselves back up again. And nothing that can help them outside of themselves, such as medicine or distractions or whatever. And they really have to figure out what it is that caused this crash in their system, be it physical or mental or emotional. And thereby they have to start observing what works for them. If I do this, then this happens to my system. If I eat this, then I start having these kinds of thoughts. If I speak with this person, I always feel like this part of me is activated afterwards. If I take rest between these hours of the day, then my nervous system feels more relaxed. It can be a whole list of things. It's an endless list of things you could observe about yourself. Generally, there is a certain level of observance and self-observance present, which leads you into all kinds of disciplines and philosophies or practices that are at their core spiritual. And we call them spiritual because they are built upon this insight of the oneness of everything in the universe, and the practices or the ways of thinking and perceiving therefore carry out this wisdom within themselves. And if they are made use of in the proper way, they can also lead to the full realization of this truth within your own individual experience. People who are spiritually awoke or awakened, they tend to change a lot, and they also tend to separate themselves from lots of very common ideas and ways of doing things. There's a specific reason for this. As you are a wave in the ocean, even if you're not aware of this fact, it still is the case that you are a wave in the ocean. And that is why people form societies, and societies have certain ways of thinking and looking at the world that are most commonly just adopted by all people. This is not a conscious choice. This is just due to the nature of consciousness, which is, if it is unaware or unconscious in some way, just assimilating whatever is in its surroundings. So throughout history, you can see a big evolution in the kind of beliefs that people carry and in the kind of things that people find valuable, in the kind of relationships that people want to have, or how they approach relationships, both to other human beings, as to nature, as to other unseen realms. And from our own point in the here and now of history, it always seems like whatever we are doing, whatever we are thinking, whatever we are seeing as true and beautiful and good is correct, and it must be the right way of doing things. When you wake up to your own inner nature and you start becoming more spiritual, you also can see that this is actually not the case. And we're just as much in a certain point of view and in a certain time frame, which determines how we think and feel and are, as any other group of human beings was in history. And there is actually no point in thinking of ourselves that this must be absolute. And in many intellectual circles, this idea is also very present, and people can be skeptic about the ideas that we carry. The only difference is when you wake up to your own inner nature, and it is as if this seed of self recognition in yourself opens up, this becomes a lived and embodied experience. So it's not only a thought or an intellectual awareness of the fact that the truths that you carry and the ways you look at life and the ways you behave maybe aren't the full truth, or maybe are changeable over time, and they do not represent something that is steadfast and eternal and always good and right. It's not only the thought or the intellectual recognition of that, it is the embodied living of this. So you know that you're a wave in the ocean. Suddenly you become aware of this, and you can see that you have a certain freedom of choosing which wave to be. And you don't necessarily have to be a wave in a group of waves, which is going in a specific direction. And the consciousness within you, as it becomes aware of the fact that it is free in some way, that it doesn't have to be stuck to one version of itself, it starts traveling and it starts exploring. And it starts without resistance, taking a billion different shapes to become more and more and more aware of what it can be, and thereby returning closer and closer and closer to its ultimate nature, which is the fullness of the ocean. So I myself also have become way less attached to a specific way of being in the past years. And the deeper and deeper I go into this journey, the more and more aspects of myself that I was very closely identified with start disappearing, or gently and softly dissolving into the ocean. And more I can recognize that this is not necessarily me. This is also not necessarily me. And this is also not necessarily me. And this is a frightening process at some point, because somewhere there is an awareness that maybe I end up being nothing at all, which at the same time is the awareness that I'm everything. If I'm not something specific, then I'm all. It's a beautiful thing to be in, and also confusing. And to those of you who are very intellectual, this reaches beyond the intellect as, because it is a paradox. It is an inherent paradox. How can you be everything, the whole universe, the whole creator consciousness, God, and at the same time be an individual human being through which this consciousness is experiencing itself? It doesn't really make a lot of sense if you start to overthink it. And this is what pushed me into spiritual awakening as well. That I was studying philosophy, I was very engaged with what is the nature of the existence, that question. And at some point, I just realized that there is a certain boundary to what the intellect can do and perceive, and that if you really try to understand, at some point you will have to go beyond your intellect. And this going beyond the intellect manifested as my first meditation, where I started observing my thoughts instead of falling into them. Suddenly there was a little bit of space between me, the consciousness that was looking at a thinking mind, and I was not perceiving of myself as a thinking thing. there is also a very deep emotional aspect to a spiritual awakening, which one could call devotion. And it has to do with the recognition of the heart about the fact that everything in your surroundings is you. And for me, this is something that came way later in the process of awakening, and it is still very much developing. And in the enlightened beings that I have seen walking this planet at this very moment, and in the ones that I've heard of, the main character trait one could observe is compassion, which essentially means that this individual or being is willing to make something else the absolute most important thing in their lives. So they offer their full existence to something which is not within their limited experience as an individual human being. And this experience comes from this deep understanding of the fact that there is in fact no difference between you and me. So the way I treat you is the way I treat myself. And the way I treat you will be reflected in the way I feel about myself as well. I think I'll end it here. I'm very glad that I got the courage to come back online and that I'm continuing this whole YouTube flow. I'm on a very stable ground as for now, with regards to my living situation, monetary situation. Social relationships are developing in different ways. So a lot has happened in the past couple of months, and I'm grateful. And Devi is with me, and I'm grateful to her because she's the instigator of all of this. And I might soon make a video about the way in which this energy form has been with me and has touched me over the past weeks. Sending lots of love.